was, there was a lot of, I don't know if anyone knows about the genocide in Rwanda. A similar genocide occurred it was pretty much the same genocide that occurred in Burundi. And what happened is presidents were killed, and that created a lot of chaos, and that created a lot of different people fighting for political power. And what that meant is that it wasn't really safe in a lot of areas in Burundi. So that's kind of the situation that I was born into. And my dad actually got involved in the fight against political corruption. And because of that, my dad was actually in jail for a little bit because he was fighting for political freedom for the people, essentially. And eventually he applied and got accepted into a PhD program in African development economics. He felt very strongly that the country just wasn't governed the right way. So when I was born, a year after I was born, my dad came to the US, but I was still in Burundi. And then when I was 4 and a half, my mom joined him and was also studying at that same school, and that's in St. Louis, Missouri, not very far away from here. So when I was 4 and a half, I came to the US, and when I was 7, my parents finally graduated. And at the time, my parents wanted to move back, but because of everything that was going on, we weren't allowed to move back, essentially. And because my dad had been in opposition, it would be unsafe for us to go back. So for about a year, my parents were trying to decide where to go because we technically weren't U.S. citizens. We were refugees, I guess, for about a year, and we couldn't really go back. So my dad finally decided to get a job in the U.S., and we moved to Massachusetts when I was 8. So I grew up mainly in Massachusetts. I've been back to Burundi only twice because it's very expensive to go back and it's not very safe. Every time I've been back, we have to be escorted by people in the military sometimes to even go where I was born and where my parents grew up, so it was really difficult. So mainly I grew up in Massachusetts from when I was 8 until when I went to college. My freshman year of high school, when I was 14, I was lucky enough to live in South Africa for 1 year. My dad was teaching at University of Cape Town for a year. And when I was 17, my dad moved to Ethiopia for 3 years, but I stayed in the U.S. I finished high school here. And I went to college in St. Louis. Washington University in St. Louis is the same place my parents went to graduate school. And I recently graduated and I moved to Chicago, so that's how I got here today. So like many of you, my parents didn't grow up in the U.S. So often in high school and growing up, they didn't always understand the things that I would talk about. There are a lot of cultural differences between the U.S. and the culture that they know. And I don't know if you ever have experiences where you try to explain something to your parents and they don't understand what you're talking about. Or they're like, oh, what is this? It's so American, I don't understand what you're talking about. So that happened to me a lot. And also, my parents went to graduate school in the U.S., but they didn't go to undergraduate school in the U.S. And what that means is that they were never in a high school in the U.S. applying to college. So when it came for me to apply to college, they weren't really sure what the process was like. They weren't sure what the culture around college was like in terms of taking SATs. They never took SATs and ACTs. They didn't know the difference. So what they did is we had a few neighbors that had gone to college in the U.S. and they pretty much helped me through the process. And we had counselors from school as well that helped us through the process. So I don't know if you have guidance counselors in your school, probably. And so our guidance counselors, they would recommend when we take the SATs and the ACT, and then in the library where I grew up, they gave you SAT books, and so I would just study in the library, take my SAT, and then it came to choose what school I wanted to go to. So I ended up choosing the school that my parents went to a long time ago for graduate school. It was a little difficult because a lot of American students choose based on where their parents went to school, but my parents went to school for graduate school, and the way that it works in Burundi is very different. There's only one college in Burundi, so it's not a choice. If you go to college, you go to that one college, and it's true for a lot of other countries where you're from. So it was a little difficult at first to decide where to go and to understand the differences between all of the different schools. And then lastly, it's really, really expensive to go to college in the U.S. So in terms of looking for a scholarship, my parents and I, we looked online. We talked to different guidance counselors at the school about different scholarship programs. And finally we settled on WashU because their financial aid was the best. And so I ended up going to school in St. Louis, and at the same time my parents were leaving the country. So it was interesting. I went to school in St. Louis for 4 years, and my parents during the time were in either Ethiopia or Tunisia the whole time. So it was pretty interesting. I really enjoyed my college experience, and if anyone has any questions about applying to college or anything like that, please ask me. I thought it was really confusing, so I can definitely help answer any questions anybody has. But another thing that I wanted to talk about is when you're growing up in the U.S. and your parents don't have the same experiences with you, I think sometimes one thing that I struggle with is my parents would get worried that I was becoming so American that I was forgetting what my own culture was. And I don't know if you guys face the same thing in school. Maybe there's not very many people in your school that are from the same places that you are. So your parents see you learning things that are more American, or hanging out with people that are not necessarily from the same culture, and sometimes your parents get afraid they're going to move away from that culture. So I think with me, a lot of it was you have to tell your parents and show them that you're proud of where you come from, but you just want to learn something new. And it's not about replacing anything, it's about learning something new and building another identity. It's not about replacing what you've already known or what you've been taught. So I think for me, growing up in the U.S., I really enjoyed it. I think sometimes it was hard to have a different culture at home than I did at school. Sometimes that was hard, but I think overall it's great because you get to have your own culture and the culture that you were brought into, but you also have this American culture that you can be a part of as well. So it's almost like you get 2 for 1 and you never have to choose between one or the other. You can just do both. So that's my life story in a nutshell. We'll see where it goes from here. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
In college, what was the hardest thing?
I think the hardest thing for me when I was in college is it was the first time I lived without my parents, like ever, for a long time, especially my mother. Like I said, when I moved to St. Louis to go to college, my mom and my dad and my little brother were in Ethiopia, and then they moved from Ethiopia to Tunisia. So when I was in college, my parents were never in the United States. So it made it very difficult to be far away from them. So I had to learn how to be independent and to do things for myself. So I think that was one of the hardest things. The other hard thing about college is you don't have as many. In high school, I think you have more people around you and it's more structured. It's like you do your homework for the week, you do your homework for the night. It's very, very structured. When you get to college, you have a lot of freedom, and so you have to learn how to study and pace yourself. You know, do you ever have a book report or something due in 1 month, and then you only start it the night before? Does that ever happen? No? You guys are awesome. It used to happen to me all the time. I think in college you have to learn how to structure your time because you get these big assignments and you have so long to do it. And there's so much freedom. So I think the second hardest thing was learning to structure my time and learning to make my own timeline about how I was going to get things done and get things completed.
So what are you doing now, and does it relate to like your background or your family?
Okay, so another thing I should probably say, my dad is an economist. He does economics, or he studies the economy of developing countries and the policies that govern that. My mom's a social worker, so she worked with children and families to kind of make sure children have a good, nurturing home. And in college, I studied engineering and economics. In high school, does anyone here like math? Anyone? Yay! In high school, I really liked math. It was my favorite subject. I also really liked science. So when I was applying to school, I would always, when you apply to college, people ask you what you want to major in, and a major is pretty much what you're going to focus most of your studies on. And I couldn't choose, and I would ask people, well, I like math, what should I do? And a lot of people told me to try engineering. And engineering is a lot of math and science, and engineering is really studying how things are built and how to best design things. So like everything around here has engineering attached to it. So like the computer has a lot of engineering attached to how the computer works, but also simple things like this podium, like why is this a certain length, why is this a certain height, the weights and the different materials that they chose, a lot of that is engineering. So I really, really liked it. So if anybody is into math or science, you should consider doing that. But in terms of the job, when I graduated, I realized that I liked studying engineering, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I ended up applying for different jobs, and I chose the job in consulting. And consulting is a really confusing profession to explain to anybody. Essentially what we do is we help companies solve problems that they weren't able to solve themselves. I work in technology consulting, so a lot of the problem is what sort of software and hardware do they use. So software is like, has everyone heard of Microsoft Word or like Facebook or any of those? So we help companies develop what sort of software they should have on their computer to support their business, essentially. So I work in business, really hierarchy minded payment.
So it sounds like, did you always know you were going to go to college? It sounds like school was like always a big part of your life because your parents were very studious.
Yeah, I think the reason why my parents were so studious is in Burundi, in order to be successful, you need a college degree, and it's in the US it's different. In Burundi, not everybody gets to go to high school, not everybody gets to go to even middle school, and even some people don't make it to elementary school. So when they came to the US and saw that almost everyone is given a high school degree, they thought that I had to finish and do very well because they saw that the only people that did well are the people that did well in school. So there was never a decision about whether or not I was going to go to college, a decision about where I was going to go. My parents told me from when I was very little, I think I was like 6 years old, and they were telling me already, you're going to go to college. And of course, when I'm 6, I don't really know what that means. I didn't really understand what college meant until I was in high school. But yeah, it wasn't really a choice. It was just something that was going to happen.
Then what would you recommend to people, to girls specifically whose parents maybe didn't go to college and whose parents maybe aren't as involved in their schooling and their education? How have you, I don't really know what I'm asking, but how do you, I guess, become empowered during the process of understanding or knowing whether it's a good fit for you to make that transition into college, or know what you want to do when you get older?
I think the first thing I would say is the choice whether or not to go to college. I think one thing to ask about is when you see people doing jobs or something that you're interested in, even if it's something that you've seen on TV that you don't really know anything about, ask questions around how do I get there, what sort of things do I need to learn to get there, because you find that a lot of people that have jobs that you want are people that have gone to college. So if you want to be a teacher, if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, a lot of jobs that you may want are going to require for you to go to college. So even if you're not sure, maybe you have 3, 4, 5 different things you want to do. If all of those things require going to college, then that's probably something you should consider. Another thing is college is very expensive, and majority of people that go to college can't afford to pay all of it, and it's the truth. So there are a lot of programs and people that donate money so that people that can't afford to go to college can go to college. So if you realize that college is something that you want because you want to be a doctor, or you want to be a teacher, or a nurse, or something like that, don't decide not to go just because it's very expensive, because you can take out a loan, you can be on a scholarship. There's a lot of ways to figure out how to do that. And then I think the most intimidating thing about college is that there's so many of them, and there's so many different kinds. So if you want to learn more, I would ask around the women that you know in the program, in this program, ask women that you know, maybe your teachers in school, your guidance counselors, ask them to help you, because if you just look online or something or look in the magazine, there's like, even just in Chicago, there must be like 25 different colleges just in the Chicago area. So I would ask questions around, well, what sort of things do I want to do? What sort of, do I want a really, really big school? Some people like a really, really small school. What do I want to study? What am I interested in? And another huge thing to remember is that you don't have to know everything. You don't have to know exactly what you want to do. So maybe you think, I kind of want to be a teacher, but I kind of want to be a doctor, but I kind of also want to be a veterinarian, and I also want to be, I don't know, a professional basketball player or something. So choose a college that will allow you to do all of those different things. You don't have to know exactly what you want, but maybe just one or two different ideas of what you want to do. And then talk to people, either guidance counselors or your mentors,